Alice moved through the city like a quiet hum, a focused presence in the endless rush of New York. Her life was all about angles and blueprints, the clean lines of architecture that promised order in a chaotic world. She was an aspiring architect working long hours at a firm that was finally on the cusp of something big. This was her moment, a chance to secure a crucial partnership that would change everything for her career. Romance? That was a distant, blurry concept, something for other people, not for a woman who lived and breathed structural integrity and design innovation. Her apartment was minimalist. Her social life mostly revolved around industry events, and her drive was a constant humming engine inside her. She liked it that way. It was predictable, controllable. Then came the messages. At first, they were just odd emails, vague warnings about the project she was spearheading. "Be careful what you build," one read, unsigned. Another, a cryptic note slipped under her office door, spoke of unseen foundations. Alice brushed them off as disgruntled competitors, maybe someone who lost out on a bid. The world of high-stakes architecture wasn't always clean. She'd seen worse. But then the calls started, silent at first, then breathing, then a low, distorted voice whispering about consequences if she didn't back off. The threats grew sharper, more personal, hinting at details only someone close to her work, or even her life, would know. The hum of her organized world started to develop a discordant note. Her boss, a man named Mr. Henderson, called her into his office one brisk Tuesday morning. He looked unusually grim. "Alice," he started, "we've been made aware of some concerns regarding your safety." Alice rolled her eyes internally. She was fine. She could handle a few crank calls. But Mr. Henderson wasn't asking. "We've arranged for a security consultant. He'll be starting today." That's when Danilo walked in. He wasn't like any security guard Alice had ever imagined. He was tall, powerfully built, with dark eyes that seemed to take in everything and give away nothing. He moved with a quiet, almost predatory grace. His suit was expensive, perfectly tailored, and somehow looked natural on him, not like a uniform. There was an intensity about him that made the air feel thick. He just stood there, watching her, his gaze unnervingly steady. His presence filled the room, pushing out all other thoughts, all other sounds. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a handshake. He simply nodded, a slight tilt of his head, and said, "Alice, I'm Danilo." His voice was deep, a low rumble that sent a strange shiver down her spine. Alice felt a profound sense of unease, a feeling that went beyond the anonymous threats. This man wasn't just a bodyguard. He was a force. Alice was immediately put off. Danilo was stern, almost cold. He lacked any conventional politeness, cutting off her attempts at small talk with a curt, "Not relevant." He observed her constantly, his dark eyes following her every move, every gesture. She felt like a specimen under a microscope, her personal space invaded, her every action scrutinized. It was suffocating. Yet, there was no denying his protective instincts. When a delivery guy lingered a moment too long at her office door, Danilo was instantly between them, a silent, unmoving barrier. When her phone rang with an unknown number, he was there, his hand hovering over her device. His protection was immediate, unquestioning, and utterly disquieting. It felt less like being guarded and more like being claimed. Slowly, subtly, Danilo began to manage her daily routine. "Your usual coffee shop is too exposed," he'd state, guiding her to a different, less crowded one. "Those late-night meetings are a risk," he'd say, rearranging her schedule without asking. He screened her calls, listened in on conversations, and dictated her movements, always citing security concerns. Alice felt her autonomy slipping away, replaced by a rigid structure imposed by this silent, imposing man. She hated it, the feeling of being controlled, of losing her independence. But the threats were still there, faint whispers in the background, a chilling reminder that she wasn't completely safe. She rationalized it. It was for her safety. She just had to endure it until the project was done. Despite her initial resistance, a strange current began to flow between them. Danilo's quiet strength, his unwavering presence, started to chip away at her defenses. There were moments, fleeting and unexpected, when his tough exterior seemed to crack. She'd catch him staring out a window, a faraway look in his eyes, a hint of something sad or burdened. Once, when she'd accidentally spilled coffee on herself, a flicker of concern had crossed his face before he quickly masked it. These tiny glimpses of vulnerability created a flicker of intrigue in Alice. Who was this man, really? What was his story? A dangerous, unspoken chemistry began to form between them, a tense, simmering heat beneath the surface of their forced proximity. It was unsettling, confusing, and undeniably, irrevocably there. She was supposed to be protected from danger, but it felt like the danger was now living right beside her. A shadow that both menaced and captivated. Her quiet, ordered life was no longer quiet, and certainly no longer ordered. It was being rewritten day by the silent, watchful man who now occupied every corner of her existence. The threats against Alice, once vague and distant, now clawed closer. An attempted break-in at her apartment, the heavy thud of someone trying to force the lock in the dead of night, had left her shaken. Danilo had been there instantly, a silent, formidable presence. He hadn't said much, just checked the locks, surveyed the perimeter, and then stood guard by her door until dawn. A few days later, a near-miss accident in her car, a truck swerving violently into her lane, forcing her onto the shoulder, solidified the danger. It wasn't just a disgruntled competitor anymore. This was serious. She found herself increasingly reliant on Danilo's protection, a strange, uncomfortable dependency growing within her. Danilo's methods were anything but conventional. He dealt with potential threats with an efficiency that was both terrifying and reassuring. One evening, as they were leaving a restaurant, a group of men had approached them, their intentions clearly hostile. Before Alice could even process the situation, Danilo had moved. It wasn't a fight, not in the traditional sense. It was a calculated, brutal dance. Limbs moved with lightning speed, precise and impactful. The men were on the ground, groaning before she could blink. He hadn't used a weapon, just his hands, his body. The sheer force and speed of his actions hinted at a darker past, a history of violence that she couldn't begin to comprehend. Alice stood there, a silent witness, her heart pounding. She was both impressed by his raw power and deeply disturbed by it. He was a protector, yes, but he was also something else, something dangerous. Due to the heightened security, Danilo became an inescapable presence in her life. He moved into the vacant apartment on her floor, practically living in her shadow. His explanation was simple. Closer proximity, faster response. Her apartment, once her sanctuary, now felt like a shared space. He was in her living room, her kitchen, her personal bubble. He'd be there when she woke up, a cup of coffee already brewing, and he'd be the last one she saw before she went to bed, standing guard outside her door. Their shared space, the constant, unwavering proximity forced an uncomfortable yet undeniable intimacy between them. Every glance, every shared meal, every quiet moment in the same room chipped away at the professional distance she tried to maintain. Alice started to observe moments where Danilo's tough exterior faltered, just for a second. She caught him staring at a framed photograph of her and her parents, a softness in his eyes that was completely out of character. Once, while she was working late, she saw him trace the spine of a worn book on her shelf, a literary classic with a surprising gentleness. These fleeting glimpses of a man burdened by something, a man with a hidden past, piqued her curiosity. They softened her initial apprehension, replacing it with a growing sense of intrigue. She found herself watching him, trying to piece together the fragments of the man behind the bodyguard. One afternoon, a particularly tense incident occurred. They were in a crowded public market, and Alice had inadvertently brushed against a man who then grabbed her arm, his grip too tight. Before she could react, Danilo was there. He moved like a blur, his hand clamping down on the man's wrist with an audible crunch. The man cried out, his face contorting in pain. Danilo's eyes, usually dark and unreadable, blazed with an intensity that sent a chill down Alice's spine. His voice, usually a low rumble, was now a dangerous growl, barely above a whisper, but laced with an undeniable threat. "No one else touches you," he warned, his gaze fixed on the man, but his words clearly directed at Alice. "No one else." The man, terrified, stumbled away. Alice stood frozen, confused and thrilling at the same time. The possessiveness in his voice, the raw power of his words was overwhelming. She interpreted it as extreme dedication to his bodyguard duties, an unwavering commitment to her safety, even if his methods were terrifying. She told herself it was just him doing his job, being overprotective, but a part of her felt something else, something far more personal. Alice found herself increasingly attracted to Danilo, despite all her misgivings. His unwavering protection, the way his intense gaze seemed to see right through her, stirred emotions she hadn't anticipated. It was a dangerous attraction, one that went against everything she believed in. He was stern, violent, and controlled her every move, yet she found herself drawn to his quiet strength, his absolute certainty in a world that felt increasingly chaotic. She struggled with the ethical implications of developing feelings for her protector. Was it Stockholm Syndrome? Was it just the adrenaline of being in constant danger? Or was it something real, something deeper, that defied logic and reason? She didn't know. All she knew was that when he was near, she felt safe. And when he looked at her, her heart did a strange, unsettling flip. The line between professional protection and personal devotion was blurring, becoming indistinguishable, and she was falling, fast into the unknown. Every day, the invisible threads that bound them together grew stronger, tighter. She was no longer just his assignment, she was something more. And he, to her, was no longer just a bodyguard. He was the most dangerous, most compelling man she had ever met. Her world, once so predictable, was now a whirlpool of conflicting emotions all centered around Danilo. Alice started noticing things, small at first, then bigger. Danilo had frequent phone calls, always in hushed tones, always stepping away from her. He'd disappear for an hour or two, sometimes claiming he was checking security perimeters, but the timing often seemed off. He'd return with a different kind of tension in his shoulders, a subtle shift in his usually unreadable expression. Once, she overheard him speaking in Italian, a language she didn't understand, but the tone was sharp, authoritative, not like a bodyguard reporting to a client. He became evasive when she asked about these encounters, giving vague answers about coordinating with his team or handling logistics. His responses never quite sat right with her. Her suspicions about his true identity began to grow, a tiny seed of doubt planted firmly in her mind. Who was this man, really? And why did he seem to have a life outside of protecting her that he guarded so fiercely? Fueled by this growing unease and a gnawing curiosity, Alice started to investigate Danilo. It wasn't easy. He was incredibly private, leaving very little digital footprint. She used her professional connections, subtly asking around about high-end security firms, trying to find any information that matched his description. She scoured online databases looking for mentions of his name, or even just his imposing physical type, in the security world. Her search yielded fragmented and often contradictory information. Some sources hinted at a past in military special forces. Others vaguely referenced private security for powerful, wealthy individuals. There were whispers of connections to groups that operated in a legal gray area, but nothing concrete. The more she dug, the deeper the mystery became. It was like trying to catch smoke. Every lead seemed to dissipate, leaving her with more questions than answers. The lack of clear information was, in itself, a red flag. Most legitimate security consultants had public profiles, credentials, a clear path of employment. Danilo had none of that. Then she found it. Tucked away in an obscure online archive of old local newspaper articles, Alice uncovered a brief mention, almost an aside, in a report about a major philanthropic event. The article detailed the attendees, mentioning Danilo Rossi, representing the Rossi family interests. The Rossi family. The name sparked a faint recognition, a memory of hushed conversations among her firm's partners about powerful old money families in the city, families with their fingers in many pies, some legitimate, some less so. The article itself was innocuous, but the context, combined with Danilo's secretive behavior, sent a shiver down her spine. It hinted at their involvement in various businesses, a polite euphemism that often meant something far more sinister. She dismissed it as a coincidence, at least at first. She tried to tell herself that many people shared surnames, that Rossi was common. She was unwilling to believe the implications, unwilling to connect the dots that started to form a very unsettling picture. But the seed of doubt had now sprouted, its roots digging deeper into her peace of mind. The threats against Alice didn't let up. If anything, they intensified. A brick came through her office window with a crude, written warning. Her car tires were slashed in a supposedly secure parking garage. These weren't random acts. They felt targeted, personal. Danilo's response was increasingly aggressive, bordering on violent, to protect her. He installed more cameras, hired additional discreet guards she never saw but knew were there, and his patrols became more frequent, more intense. He moved with a coiled energy, always on alert, always ready to strike. Alice witnessed his ruthlessness firsthand. One evening, after a late meeting, a car followed them too closely. Danilo didn't hesitate. He pulled a sharp U-turn, forcing the other car to swerve violently, nearly causing a crash. Then he sped off in the opposite direction, leaving the bewildered pursuers behind. His actions demonstrated a level of power and influence far beyond a typical bodyguard. He wasn't just reacting, he was anticipating, controlling, dominating every situation. It was terrifying, yet undeniably effective. The true chilling efficiency of Danilo's protection revealed itself during a near-fatal encounter. Alice was leaving a coffee shop, alone for a rare moment, when two men suddenly lunged at her from an alley. Before she could scream, Danilo was there. He appeared out of nowhere, a blur of motion and raw power. He moved with a speed and precision that was almost inhuman. One man went down with a sickening thud, a single, swift blow to the neck. The other attacker, startled, pulled out a knife. Danilo disarmed him in an instant, twisting the man's arm until a sharp crack echoed in the alley. The knife clattered to the ground. He then delivered a brutal kick, sending the man sprawling into a pile of trash cans. It was over in seconds. Alice stood frozen, her heart pounding, watching him eliminate the attackers with chilling efficiency. There was no hesitation, no wasted movement, just cold, hard brutality. He wasn't just a bodyguard, he was a weapon. The incident left her profoundly shaken, the reality of the danger she was in crashing down on her. Yet, in the aftermath, as Danilo gently guided her away, his hand firm on her back, she also felt a deep, overwhelming gratitude. She was alive because of him. And that gratitude only deepened her confusion about the man who embodied both savage violence and unwavering protection. Alice found herself in a deep internal conflict. Her burgeoning feelings for Danilo were undeniable, a confusing mix of attraction, fear, and a strange comfort in his presence. But her growing suspicion, fueled by his secret meetings, the vague answers, and the newspaper article, was a constant, nagging voice in her head. She grappled with the idea that the man protecting her might be connected to the very danger she faced. Could he be involved in these threats? Was he orchestrating them to keep her close, to make her reliant on him? The thought was horrifying, a betrayal that cut deeper than any physical threat. The line between protector and captor began to blur in her mind. He held her life in his hands literally. He controlled her movements, her interactions, her safety. He was her shield, but also, potentially, the source of her imprisonment. She was falling for a man who was a mystery, a man who might be far more dangerous than any of the threats lurking in the shadows. The thought was both terrifying and strangely compelling. She knew she needed answers, and soon, before she lost herself completely in this dangerous, intoxicating dance. Alice finally uncovered undeniable evidence of Danilo's true identity, not through a subtle hint or a vague article, but a direct, brutal confirmation. It happened when she picked up his dry cleaning, a mundane task he usually handled himself. A small, forgotten notebook had fallen out of his jacket pocket. It wasn't just any notebook. It was a ledger filled with names, dates, and amounts that made no sense to her at first glance. But then she saw it, a single entry that froze her blood. Operation Phoenix, Alice Vance acquisition complete. Followed by a date several months prior, before he had even entered her life. And next to it, a symbol, a stylized eagle that she had seen before, always subtly, always in the background, but now undeniably linked to the powerful shadowy organization she had heard whispered about in hushed tones, the very one the old newspaper article had vaguely referenced. The realization hit her with devastating force, shattering her entire perception of him. Danilo wasn't just connected to a powerful family, he was the head of it. The security consultant was a lie. The bodyguard was a carefully constructed facade. He was a mafia boss, and she was not a client, but a target. The ledger wasn't just about money, it was about control, ownership. She was an acquisition. The word itself felt like a physical blow. Her mind raced, replaying every interaction, every intense gaze, every possessive word. The "no one else touches you" warning no longer sounded like a protective declaration. It sounded like a claim of ownership. A profound sense of betrayal washed over her, quickly followed by a cold, sharp fear. She understood now, with chilling clarity, that his protection was not an act of safeguard, but a form of possessive control. He hadn't been protecting her from threats. He had been protecting his interest in her. The threats, the escalating danger, the near-fatal encounters, a cold dread settled in her stomach. Had he orchestrated them, exaggerated them, used them to isolate her, to make her dependent, to keep her close? The thought was horrifying. A betrayal so deep it felt like a physical wound. Every kind word, every moment of shared vulnerability, every flicker of attraction now felt tainted, part of an elaborate, cruel deception. She had been a pawn in a game she didn't even know she was playing. She couldn't pretend. She couldn't act normal. When Danilo returned later that evening, the air in the apartment was thick with unspoken tension. He sensed it immediately, his usual calm demeanor shifting into a wary alertness. Alice held the small ledger in her hand, her knuckles white. She didn't speak, just held it out to him, her eyes burning with a mixture of anger and terror. "What is this, Danilo?" Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling with a force she hadn't known she possessed. "What is Operation Phoenix? Who are you, really?" Danilo's stoic expression faltered, just for a moment. He looked at the ledger, then back at her, a flicker of something unreadable in his dark eyes. Resignation, perhaps, or a deep regret. He didn't deny it. He didn't try to lie. The charade was over. He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of weariness she had never seen before. "Alice," he began, his voice low, "I can explain." "Explain what?" she shot back, her voice rising now, laced with raw emotion. Explain why you pretended to be my bodyguard? Explain why you've been lying to me since the moment we met? Explain why I'm listed as an acquisition in your book, like some kind of property. Her anger was palpable, a desperate shield against the rising tide of fear. He was forced to drop his facade, his carefully constructed persona crumbling under the weight of her accusation. He admitted his true identity, not with pride, but with a quiet, heavy tone that suggested it was a burden. He was Danilo Rossi, head of the Rossi family, a name that commanded fear and respect in certain circles. He confessed his reasons for keeping it secret, his eyes never leaving hers. He told her about his genuine attraction, a spark he felt the first moment he saw her. He said he wanted to protect her, but admitted his methods were unconventional, born out of a world where subtlety was a weakness. He revealed that the initial threats were, in fact, real. Her architectural project, a major urban redevelopment, had inadvertently stepped on the toes of a rival organization, one that saw her as a weak link, an easy target to disrupt his family's interests. "I saw you as vulnerable," he said, his voice rough, "and I decided to take matters into my own hands. I couldn't let them touch you. No one else touches you." The words, once so alluring, now sounded menacing, a twisted declaration of possession. He explained that after the initial threats, he used his influence, his network, to control the situation to ensure no one else would approach her. He had created a bubble around her, a cage of protection, all for her safety, he claimed. Danilo then explained the complex web of his world, where power, loyalty, and danger intertwined. It was a world of unspoken rules, of territories, of rivals constantly vying for advantage. Her project, he revealed, was a prime opportunity for his group to expand, and the threats were from a competing faction trying to muscle in. He saw her as a brilliant, naive woman caught in the crossfire of a war she didn't understand. He saw her as someone he needed to shield, to keep safe, even if it meant deceiving her, even if it meant bending her reality to fit his protective design. He had seen her as someone worth protecting, worth acquiring, worth keeping by his side, no matter the cost, no matter the lies. Alice was left reeling, grappling with the truth. The man who had saved her life, who had made her feel safe despite the chaos, was also the man who had systematically lied to her, manipulated her, and effectively imprisoned her under the guise of protection. She loved the man who protected her, the fierce, unwavering presence who stood between her and danger. But she feared the man who deceived her, the powerful, ruthless figure who saw her as an acquisition. Her future and her safety now seemed inextricably linked to his dangerous world. She was no longer just an architect. She was a part of Danilo Rossi's empire, whether she liked it or not. The knowledge was a heavy weight, pressing down on her, stealing her breath. She had fallen for a monster, a protector, a captor, and she had no idea what came next. The revelation of Danilo's true identity, the Mafia boss, quickly turned Alice's world upside down. The threats that had initially seemed external suddenly felt much closer, more personal. Danilo's rivals, now fully aware of his growing attachment to Alice, wasted no time in targeting her directly. They saw her as his weak spot, a vulnerability they could exploit to gain an advantage in their ongoing power struggles. Her safety, once a private concern, became a major point of contention in the escalating Mafia war. The conflict was no longer just about business or territory. It was personal, and Alice was caught right in the middle. The stakes had never been higher, and she felt like a pawn in a game she didn't understand. Danilo, ever the protector, moved Alice to a secure, hidden location. It was a beautiful place, luxurious even, but it felt like a gilded cage. The high walls, the constant presence of armed men, the lack of connection to the outside world, it all contributed to a suffocating sense of isolation. She was cut off from her friends, her work, her entire former life. Her freedom, once something she took for granted, was now severely restricted. Every window felt like a barrier, every door a lock. Her resentment towards Danilo grew with each passing day, even as he tried to ensure her comfort and safety. He brought her books, arranged for her favorite foods, and tried to talk to her, but the words felt hollow. She knew he was doing it to protect her, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped. Danilo was under immense pressure. He was fighting on multiple fronts, trying to protect Alice while also maintaining control of his empire. The war with his rivals was brutal, demanding difficult, often morally ambiguous decisions. Alice witnessed the brutal realities of his world firsthand. She saw the stress etched on his face, the dark circles under his eyes, the way his jaw was constantly clenched. She overheard snippets of phone calls that spoke of violence, betrayal, and consequences. She saw the men around him, their hardened faces and watchful eyes, a constant reminder of the dangerous world she was now part of. He was making choices that would affect countless lives, all while trying to keep her safe. It was a heavy burden, and she could see it weighing him down. Despite the danger and their increasingly strained relationship, there were flashes of tenderness that surprised Alice. In the quiet moments, after a particularly tense phone call or a close call with his rivals, Danilo would sometimes drop his guard. He would look at her with an intensity that spoke volumes, a deep affection that seemed to contradict the ruthless man she knew him to be. He would touch her hair or hold her hand, and for a brief moment she would see the man she had fallen for, the one who had protected her so fiercely. He showed his vulnerability, revealing a glimpse of the man beneath the powerful exterior. And despite everything, Alice still found herself drawn to him, her heart a confusing mess of fear, anger, and undeniable attraction. She hated him for deceiving her, but she couldn't deny the connection they shared. The isolation and the constant fear eventually became too much. Overwhelmed by her situation, Alice decided she couldn't just sit there and wait. She had to try to escape. She meticulously planned, watching the guards' rotations, studying the layout of the compound. One night, she made her move, slipping out of her room, her heart pounding in her chest. She managed to get past a few checkpoints, fueled by a desperate hope for freedom, but Danilo's reach was pervasive. Her attempt was thwarted before she could even get close to the perimeter. She was brought back, not roughly, but with a quiet, resolute firmness that spoke of his absolute control. The failed escape deepened her despair, reinforcing her sense of entrapment. There was no way out. Later, in a rare moment of unguarded honesty, Danilo revealed a past trauma. He spoke of a younger sister lost years ago to a rival family's attack, a tragedy that had shaped his protective nature, his need for control. He spoke of the helplessness he felt then, and his vow to never let anyone he cared about suffer the same fate. This revelation humanized him slightly for Alice. It didn't erase his deception or the fear he instilled, but it added another layer to their complex relationship. She began to understand, though not entirely forgive, some of his motivations. He wasn't just a monster. He was a man scarred by loss, driven by a deep-seated need to protect. This understanding, however small, was a crack in the wall of her resentment, a tiny glimmer in the darkness. She saw the pain in his eyes, the heavy weight of his past, and for a moment the line between captor and protector seemed to blur once more. Alice, despite the despair of her failed escape, refused to be a passive victim. The humanizing glimpse into Danilo's past, while not excusing his actions, had sparked something in her. She was an architect, a problem solver, and she started to look at her situation not as an end, but as a complex challenge. She began observing Danilo's operations more closely, listening to the hushed conversations, piecing together fragments of information. She noticed inefficiencies in his security, patterns in his rivals' attacks and potential vulnerabilities in their supply chains. Her mind, trained to see structures and systems, started identifying weaknesses where others saw only chaos. She saw how Danilo's rivals were often predictable, and how his own men sometimes overlooked crucial details in their rigid adherence to protocol. One evening, after a particularly frustrating update on a botched operation, Danilo was pacing his study, a picture of raw frustration. Alice, sitting quietly in a corner, spoke up. "They always go for the northern route, don't they?" she said, her voice soft but clear. Danilo stopped, turning slowly to face her. His eyes narrowed in surprise. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his tone wary. "Your rivals," she continued, unfazed. "Every time they try to move something or hit one of your outposts, it's the northern route. It's the most direct, but it's also the most exposed." She then explained, with a detached, analytical calm, how a slight alteration in their own transport patterns, or a preemptive disruption of that specific route, could throw the rivals off balance. Danilo listened, his initial skepticism giving way to a grudging interest, then a flicker of genuine intrigue. Her intelligence and strategic thinking, honed in the world of blueprints and urban planning, impressed him. He saw a different kind of strength in her, one he hadn't fully appreciated before. This brief exchange marked a shift. Danilo, under immense pressure, realized Alice's insights could be genuinely valuable in ending the conflict that was consuming his world. He tentatively began to involve her in his plans, seeking her counsel on certain logistical problems or potential counter-moves. It started small, with him asking her opinion on the structural integrity of a potential safe house, or the best way to secure a remote warehouse. But soon, he was laying out more complex scenarios, listening intently as she analyzed the risks and proposed solutions. This collaboration slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to shift their dynamic. It was no longer just captor and captive, but something more akin to partners, bound by a shared, dangerous objective. Alice, with her sharp mind and unexpected perspective, became an unlikely ally. They worked together on a crucial aspect of the unfolding conflict, a plan to disrupt a major operation of his most aggressive rival. Her architectural training helped them visualize the enemy's movements, predict their likely responses, and identify critical choke points. Danilo provided the resources, the muscle, and the intimate knowledge of the underworld. Their combined strengths created a powerful, unexpected force. He found himself relying on her intellect, something he hadn't expected from anyone, let alone the woman he had essentially imprisoned. This shared purpose, the intense focus on a common enemy, rekindled a spark of understanding and even a fragile respect between them. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a recognition of each other's capabilities, a foundation for something new. During a quiet moment, after a successful, albeit small, tactical victory, Alice and Danilo had a candid conversation. The air was thick with the lingering scent of gunpowder and the tension of their shared experience. "I was so scared," Alice admitted, her voice barely a whisper, looking out at the city lights. "And so angry. You lied to me, Danilo. You took away my freedom." Danilo, sitting beside her, didn't immediately respond. He ran a hand through his hair, his gaze fixed on the distance. "I know," he finally said, his voice rough. "I made mistakes. I thought I was protecting you. I didn't know any other way." He looked at her then, his dark eyes holding a depth of regret she hadn't seen before. "I'm sorry, Alice," he said, the words sounding alien on his tongue, "for the fear, for the deception. I never meant to hurt you." Alice looked at him, searching his face. She saw the genuine remorse, the heavy burden he carried. It wasn't an easy apology, but it was real. In that moment, they found a fragile common ground, built on the shared experience of survival and a raw, painful honesty. With this newfound, tentative understanding, they began to devise a risky, intricate plan to neutralize the primary threat, the rival family that had been relentlessly pursuing Danilo and, by extension, Alice. The plan required both Danilo's power and Alice's intellect. She meticulously mapped out escape routes, analyzed security camera blind spots, and even suggested ways to exploit the rivals' internal power struggles. Danilo, in turn, gathered his most trusted men, arming them with the information Alice provided. The stakes were incredibly high, with their lives and future hanging in the balance. Failure meant not just their demise, but the continued chaos and danger that had become their reality. Alice, still wary, began to place a conditional trust in Danilo. She hadn't forgotten his deception, nor the way he had controlled her life. But she saw his genuine desire to protect her, even if his methods were often brutal and morally ambiguous. She saw the man beneath the boss, the one who was capable of tenderness and remorse. The possibility of a future together, one free from the constant shadows of war, began to emerge, a delicate, fragile hope in the heart of the storm. She knew it wouldn't be easy, that his world was deeply ingrained, but she also saw a path, however narrow, towards a different kind of life. The day arrived, thick with a tension that hummed in the air. Alice and Danilo put their elaborate plan into motion. It wasn't a single, dramatic event, but a series of calculated moves across the city, each piece relying on the previous one. Alice, positioned in a secure, remote location, monitored the feeds from hidden cameras and tapped communication lines. Her architectural mind, usually focused on structures and blueprints, was now mapping out enemy movements, predicting their reactions. She directed Danilo's teams, feeding them real-time intelligence, her voice calm and steady despite the pounding in her chest. The operation was fraught with danger, every moment a hair's breadth from disaster. An unexpected complication arose when one of Danilo's lieutenants was cornered. Alice quickly rerouted another team, guiding them through a labyrinth of back alleys she'd studied for hours, turning what could have been a fatal ambush into a tactical advantage. Their combined efforts were crucial for success. Danilo, on the ground, moved with a brutal efficiency, his presence a dark storm tearing through the enemy lines. He executed Alice's instructions without question, a silent, deadly force. During the climax of the confrontation, a critical moment arose. Danilo's primary target, the rival boss, had been isolated, but not without a desperate counterattack. A sniper, hidden in a building overlooking Danilo's position, took aim at Alice's location, not Danilo's. He knew Danilo's weakness. Alice saw it on a delay through a grainy camera feed, a red dot appearing on the window of her safe house. There wasn't time to warn her or for her to move. Danilo, anticipating this exact move, had placed himself in a direct line between Alice's hidden vantage point and any potential long-range threat. He had a prearranged signal with his men, a warning if her location was compromised. As the shot rang out, he didn't hesitate. He threw himself forward, taking the bullet in his shoulder. It wasn't a direct hit on his heart, but it was a deep, painful wound. He collapsed, his men rushing to his side, but the immediate threat to Alice was neutralized. He put his life on the line to protect her, a stark, undeniable proof of his love and commitment. Alice, seeing the entire scene unfold on her screen, felt a cold dread grip her heart, followed by a surge of something she couldn't name. She witnessed his unwavering devotion solidifying her feelings for him in that terrifying instant. It wasn't just protection anymore, it was an absolute, selfless act. With Danilo's sacrifice, his men fought with renewed fury. The rival boss, exposed and outmaneuvered, was quickly apprehended. The main antagonist, the rival organization that had caused so much chaos, was finally defeated, bringing an end to the immediate threat. The victory was hard-won, leaving both Alice and Danilo scarred, but undeniably victorious. The Mafia war, at least this particular brutal chapter, subsided, ushering in a period of fragile, uneasy peace. The city, which had felt like a battleground for weeks, seemed to breathe a collective sigh. The aftermath was complex. The consequences of the conflict were far-reaching, directly impacting Danilo's organization. He had to consolidate his power, bring defiant factions back in line, and navigate the new landscape created by the absence of his main rival. There was a power vacuum, and others would try to fill it. Alice, now by his side, watched him work, making difficult decisions, often with a heavy heart. She reflected on the brutal realities she had witnessed, the violence, the betrayals, the unyielding demand for loyalty. It was a world she never imagined, a world that now, irrevocably, included her. Alice came to terms with Danilo's world, understanding that he could not entirely escape it. It was too deeply ingrained, too much a part of who he was and what he controlled. She accepted that their love, if it was to thrive, would always exist within the context of his power and influence, within the shadows of his empire. She chose to stay, not out of fear, not because she felt trapped, but out of love and a conscious desire to build a future with him, however unconventional that future might be. She saw the man, not just the boss, and that man needed her, just as she, surprisingly, found she needed him. Danilo, deeply affected by Alice's influence and her willingness to stay, made a promise. It wasn't a grand, sweeping declaration, but a quiet, earnest commitment. He vowed to seek a more legitimate path where possible, to gradually transition parts of his operations, to minimize the violence and the bloodshed. He committed to protecting her, not just from external threats, but from the darker, more destructive aspects of his own life. Their relationship was redefined, built on a new foundation of honesty, mutual respect, and a shared understanding of the difficult path ahead. They both knew it wouldn't be easy. That change was slow and dangerous in his world, but for the first time, they were facing it together. Months later, the frantic pace of survival had given way to a steady, deliberate effort to build a different future. Alice and Danilo were actively working towards a more legitimate existence, a concept that had once seemed impossible in Danilo's world. Alice, with her sharp architectural mind and innate organizational skills, found a new purpose. She was no longer just an architect designing buildings for others. She was now overseeing legitimate business ventures for Danilo's organization. Warehouses were being repurposed into distribution centers for legal goods. Old offices were renovated for new, above-board enterprises. She brought her meticulous planning and creative problem-solving to projects that, for the first time, were entirely transparent. Danilo, for his part, was slowly but surely transitioning aspects of his empire. It was a painstaking process, unwinding decades of entrenched operations, facing resistance from within and suspicion from without, but he was committed. He saw the potential for a new legacy, one that Alice had helped him envision. Alice, though still cautious and acutely aware of the lingering shadows, found a place within Danilo's world that was uniquely her own. She wasn't just his partner. She was becoming an influential figure in her own right. His inner circle, initially wary of the outsider, had come to respect her intellect, her unwavering resolve, and her quiet strength. She didn't shy away from the moral complexities of their situation, but instead sought to do good where she could, pushing for ethical practices in their new ventures, advocating for fair treatment of employees, and using her position to subtly shift the culture around them. She knew the past couldn't be erased, but the future was still unwritten. Their love had deepened, forged in the fires of danger and deception, tempered by shared purpose and mutual respect. Danilo remained fiercely protective, but his possessiveness had evolved. It was no longer the desperate grip of a man trying to control what he feared losing, but the steady, unwavering devotion of a partner who cherished and admired the woman by his side. He listened to her, valued her input, and often deferred to her judgment in matters both personal and professional. Alice, no longer feeling like a captive, chose to be by his side, not out of obligation, but out of a profound and abiding love for the complex man he was, and the better man he was striving to become. They began to consider a future that included a family, a thought that had once been unthinkable for both of them. The idea of children, of blending their two worlds into a new, hopeful legacy, filled them with a quiet joy. Danilo, watching Alice interact with the children of his loyal men, saw a future beyond power struggles and territorial disputes. He began to contemplate his own legacy, driven by a desire to leave something better for his potential children, a safer, more honorable path. Alice, with her unwavering belief in his capacity for change, continued to help him envision that path, guiding him towards redemption and a more legitimate future. Of course, the past was never entirely forgotten. Lingering shadows of Danilo's former life occasionally resurfaced. An old rival, a forgotten debt, a sudden threat from a corner of the world he thought he had left behind. These moments were stark reminders of the tightrope they walked. They faced ongoing challenges, but now they faced them together, as a united front. Their relationship was a constant negotiation between love, power, and morality, a delicate balance they learned to maintain with increasing skill. Each challenge overcome only strengthened their bond, proving that their partnership was resilient enough to withstand the tremors of his past. One evening, as the city lights twinkled below, Alice and Danilo stood together on the balcony of their new, less fortified home. It was an apartment Alice had personally designed, blending modern elegance with discreet security features she had insisted upon. The view was expansive, a symbol of their shared future, one they were actively building, brick by painful brick. Their journey had been one of danger, deceit, love, and ultimately redemption. It was a testament to the idea that true love could indeed exist even in the most dangerous of worlds, transforming those within it, shaping them into something stronger, more honest, and capable of a future they once thought impossible. The past was a scar, but the future was a promise, and they were ready to face it, hand in hand.